All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm here with my good friend Claire, and we're going to be talking about mindful eating. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Just for those of our audience that aren't already necessarily familiar with you, can you just give us a brief introduction to who you are?
Absolutely. Hi, y'all. Happy to be here. Thanks, Clayton. So my name is Claire Siegel. I am the CEO and founder of Flourish, which I'm super excited to share with you. But beyond that, I am a registered dietitian and someone with a pretty lengthy diet history under my belt. So definitely some of the topics that we'll talk about here today are near and dear to my heart. But my mission in life is to help women stop dieting and to create an approach to health that really enhances their life and that they can sustain throughout their lives.
Awesome. All right. So can you just give us a little bit more depth? Obviously we know who you are, but just walk us through really what made you get into the health and fitness field and why you do what you do.
Yeah. So like I said in the first question, I've got quite the diet history under my belt. So growing up, I was, a slightly larger child. And, I have vivid memories of like getting made fun of on the school bus, like really tough stuff. And so my, well-meaning mother did not really know what to do with me. And so she put me on Weight Watchers thinking that would be the best choice. So I started Weight Watchers at the age of 13, which, sounds wild to me now, but so many of the women that I've worked with have had a very similar kind of start date in terms of their diet history. So started Weight Watchers at 13, went on to do just about everything: Atkins, juice cleanses, calorie counting, macro tracking, Whole30, the whole gamut. And in fact, I was like just really so kind of inspired around diet nutrition that I actually did go on to become a registered dietitian. I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. But it wasn't until I actually had my own kind of health crisis in 2017. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I realized that health is a lot more than the number on the scale. It's more than just what we eat and how much we exercise. There's a mental component, a physical component. And health is something that we really need to kind of zoom out to fully understand and appreciate. So I started my company, Flourish, to help women create a truly sustainable approach to health, free from the rigidity of diets that quite often fail them.
Well, thank you for that in-depth background and overview into who you are. So let's jump into kind of the topic of dieting, since that's what we're here to talk about. So recently I read a study indicating that women will start a new diet twice a year, but it'll only last about 4.5 weeks. And it even indicated that over a lifetime, the average woman will start a new diet 130 times, which just seems crazy to me. What exactly is it that makes sustaining a diet so difficult, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the thing about this is it's not my opinion. It's really the science. It's what exactly you said, like the research shows. And there are a lot of factors that make diets unsustainable. And what really frustrates me the most is the way that, because we're talking about women here, I'll refer to them exclusively. But what frustrates me the most about diets is the way that women internalize this failure and blame themselves. I hear women all the time talking about having a lack of self-control or kind of this like insufficient willpower, when in reality, it is the diets to blame. So for the purposes of this question, we're going to go a little deep here on the science. Hopefully y'all can stick with me. I'm sure that you can. So we'll assume that, the women we're talking about here are going on diets explicitly to lose weight, right? And we often hear weight loss boiled down very simply to calories in, calories out, right? Just eat less than you burn. And while that is true, it's not the entire picture. Okay. So your body weight is regulated by a very complex neurohormonal system that's impacted by many factors, including your genetics, your environment, your behaviors, and more than even that. And so when you lose weight quickly through a diet, that system, that complex neurohormonal system, has checks in place to reverse that weight loss. And so you often will find, and anyone listening or reading this will probably have that experience of, okay, I go on a diet, I lose the weight, and then I gain it all back, and often plus some. So our bodies have these checks in place to return us to our original weight, or quite often actually a slightly higher weight than where we started. And that's really because our bodies like balance. Our bodies really like it when calories in equals calories out. So when you tip that balance, and I mean this like in an extreme way, which diets often require, right? So when you do this in an extreme way by either eating less, much less, or exercising more, like a lot more, and typically that often happens, like we do both at the same time, especially like I'm thinking January, right? So the first month of the year that everyone just about spends on a diet in a really extreme way, your body starts to fight back by slowing your metabolic rate. So this is called adaptive thermogenesis. I can keep going into more kind of hormonal factors. Would that be helpful, Clayton?
Yeah, I think so. I think our
Okay.
audience would enjoy that.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of, again, what's happening metabolically, but there's also hormonal factors at play. And I want to focus on two main ones. So they're called leptin and ghrelin. Okay, so we're going to talk about what happens with leptin and ghrelin in response to a decrease in that like calories in side of the equation. Okay, so we'll start with leptin. Leptin is a hormone that's actually released by your fat cells. Okay. And when leptin is released, you feel satisfied by the foods that you're eating. So in light of a caloric restriction, your leptin levels will actually decrease. So what happens is kind of the harder you diet, the less satisfied that you feel. All right. So then there's also ghrelin, which is often you'll hear it referred to as the hunger hormone. The way I remember this is like ghrelin, like grr, like your stomach is growling. It's the hunger hormone. So when you restrict your calories by dieting, your ghrelin levels will actually increase. So that increases your hunger levels. Okay. So if we kind of put this together, and this is just like a slice of what's happening inside your body when you're on a diet. First, again, your metabolic rate slows because of that adaptive thermogenesis. Your leptin levels are down. So what little food you are eating is actually satisfying you less. And then your ghrelin levels are up. So you're feeling more hungry. Then we'll just add this in for, giggles here. Dieting is actually a stress on the body, right? If you think about like, way back in caveman days, a diet would be the same thing as a famine, right? And our bodies have not evolved to know the difference between I'm dieting to fit into a bridesmaid's dress versus I'm in a famine and we need to hold on to body fat, right? So dieting is a stress on the body, which is going to cause an increase in cortisol, which will also increase your carbohydrate cravings. So all of this is happening in your body, right? And then your mind is also at work to restore you back to balance. And you'll find that by having an increase in kind of the intensity and number of food-related thoughts. So there's a lot going on here. And I'll offer you an example of like kind of how this actually comes into play in real life. So you're 30 days into your diet, maybe it's like February 1st, and you find yourself at happy hour with your girlfriends, and you went in, intending to be good. That's what we say. But like, the chips and queso, if you're here in Austin, chips and queso get placed on the table and you're like, well, screw it. And you end up leaving happy hour feeling absolutely stuffed. And like the last month of effort was just absolutely worthless, which often sets off, what I call the screw it effect. It's a spiral. And since you already like fell off the wagon, quote unquote, you might as well keep going. And that's when we start seeing this like kind of diet cycle, this all on, this all off, pattern really perpetuate. And again, the problem that I have is that women blame themselves for this rather than understanding that it's the unsustainable approach to nutrition that caused it. And your body is just doing its job in response.
Well, wow, that was an amazing response and gave our listeners a great overview on, some of those challenges. And more than anything, I think it reinforces that dieting and, falling off and getting into that, like you said, screw it sort of mentality isn't necessarily a willpower issue, but actually a physiology issue that creates the challenges for all of us. So I think intuitively, even for our audience that didn't necessarily know all that, they understand that dieting is challenging and they understand it's very short-lived and it's not something that's sustainable. So even if we understand all those things, why do you think dieting is so appealing to people out there trying to improve their health or change their body composition? What draws us back into this kind of dieting cycle?
Yeah. Well, Clayton, you and I talked about this in our last conversation, the fact that humans are not rational creatures, like in all aspects of life, not just health or nutrition, we find ourselves not doing what we know. So, examples I personally experienced, sometimes I'll stay up late scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, even though I know it's not good for me and it's not good for my sleep quality. Or, you may find yourself like eating a pint of ice cream in front of the TV, even though it's not going to make you feel good. Or, we do the same thing with like exes in our lives. Like, oh, let me go look at my ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend's Facebook or Instagram. Like we act based on our emotions, not on our logic. And I think part of that is because we are seeking short-term satisfaction rather than acting on the logic that will ultimately lead to kind of that, what we're talking about here, like long-term transformation. And I don't say that to encourage anyone to kind of throw their hands up and say, oh, well, forget it. Like I'm an emotional creature. Like, no, I think we can do better here. We can really filter every diet through critical thinking. So something, even in the work that I do, or maybe because of the work that I do, I get tons of ads for weight loss programs or even programs that promote quick weight loss while stating that they're not a diet or claiming not to be a diet. And the thing is, and I think like, again, everything I'm sharing here, like just run through your personal experience. Like, don't just take it from me, like think back to what you've personally experienced, but like anyone who's been on a diet before has probably lost weight.
Right.
Like the problem isn't usually losing that initial weight, especially like in your first few tries, because of what I talked about in the last question. Like that actually gets harder and harder every diet you try. But the initial weight loss is not hard typically. The difficulty tends to come in when it comes to sustaining that weight loss. So again, this is where like the critical thinking needs to come in. So when you get that, before and after picture on your Instagram feed, someone who lost a lot of weight in a short amount of time, don't immediately hand over your credit card thinking like, oh, this time is going to be different for me. Instead, what I want to do, and if you're, listening, maybe grab like a pen and paper, because I'm going to give you some specific questions you can ask yourself when you're hearing some of these ads or again, seeing the before and after pictures. So one would be, what did this person do to achieve those results? Has this person maintained those results? Okay, they lost 20 pounds in 4 weeks. How? And then also like, what happens next? If that's not clear yet, then maybe a question is like, what will they have to do to maintain those results? And then once you understand maybe this person's experience that you're seeing in an ad, then I want you to like kind of look inward. So am I willing to take those actions? Right? I see this all the time with like macro counting and like preparing for like a fitness competitions. I used to follow personally like a ton of like bodybuilders on Instagram and female bodybuilders specifically. And I really wanted these abs. And then one day I woke up and was like, wait, they're all like, meal prepping every single meal, working out 6 days a week and tracking their macros. Like, I don't actually want to do any of that.
Right.
And I actually don't think the abs are worth it to me. And so you have to ask yourself, am I willing to go to those lengths? And are those actions in alignment with my values? And then you have to understand that even if you did all the same things, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would experience the same results. So you have to ask yourself, is it guaranteed that if I take the same action, will I achieve the same results? And if I were to achieve those results, what would actually change for me? That's again, in my personal experience, what I realized is like abs would be cool, but like my life wouldn't actually change because I'm not a bodybuilder. Like no one's paying me to have abs. I'm not winning any competitions here. So I'm kind of a big takeaway here on this question that I'll leave you with is what I remind our members all the time is that sustainable results require sustainable actions. Okay. So every time that you start a new diet or, you start a reset or whatever it is that you want to call it. And I encourage you to like practice body autonomy and do whatever it is that you want with your body. But if you want it to last, whatever results that you get, you need to ask yourself, can I do this most of the time for the rest of my life?
All right. Thanks for that detailed explanation. One of the things that I'm starting to hear more about and, starting to see more of a trend of is this concept of mindful eating. And so it's something that seems to be gaining popularity, and I'm hearing more and more on social media and from experts. Can you just walk us through what mindful eating is?
Yeah. So I think first we can start with just a definition of general mindfulness because we can do anything mindfully.
Right.
So psychology today defines mindfulness as a state of active, open attention to the present. The state is described as observing one's thoughts and feelings without judging them as good or bad. So if we apply this concept of mindfulness to eating, we can think of it as a state of having active, open attention to the present action of eating. And I'll contrast this with like the way that we usually eat. So I think probably in pandemic times, it's like hunched over our, laptop screen using our kitchen counter as a desk, and we're like eating, shoveling food in our face while reading emails, or maybe like the pantry graze at the end of the workday. So I'd say all those things are sort of like the opposite of mindful eating. And I'm also very aware that sometimes life it actually requires that we eat in a way that's not necessarily mindful. And that's okay too.
All right. As far as mindful eating goes, I can definitely relate to, what we've discussed, just the last year of the pandemic, and, everyone's on Zoom, and we're eating whenever, wherever, and just trying to fit things in, and adapt to changes as quickly as possible. As far as actual mindful eating goes, are there any specific requirements or restrictions, in how that's done, or, how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think with mindful eating, especially if it's a pretty big departure from how you eat right now, I would really encourage you to start small. So something that I'll encourage our members to do is to just start with like one mindful snack a day. And so what that may look like is, taking a highly intentional, let's call it a 3 p.m. snack where you close the laptop. Maybe you get away from your desk and certainly your phone. Maybe you go outside, and it's really just like you and the food, and you're very conscious and present in that experience. You're actually like, looking at the food. You may smell the food, taking really intentional bites, actually chewing your food. I mean, all those things that probably sound silly and you may think that you're doing day to day, but you'll find like in the experience of mindful eating, just how different it is, how much slower it is, how much more, I think in many cases, peaceful it is. And we'll talk about kind of how it impacts your hunger and fullness and kind of awareness of those physiological feelings. But it also can help you enjoy your food a lot more. And also it's great for your health as well. Actually chewing your food is an important part of the digestive process, right? It's actually where it starts in your mouth. And so you can actually, we found that our members who maybe come in struggling with like GI issues and struggles with digestion, by implementing a more mindful approach, and again, we start small, it can actually help alleviate some of those things as well.
Great. I think that's something we can all relate to. And, when I was first kind of introduced to this, you're right. It can sound silly to actually take the time to think through, like, what am I doing? How am I enjoying this? How fast am I chewing? And even as you said, like rituals such as smelling the food, or being outside, or whatever that may be. But yeah, it's amazing how much of a difference that can make. And as you alluded to a couple questions ago, I think we all probably find ourselves doing the opposite of that quite frequently. We're in front of a laptop, we're in front of a TV, we're doing something with friends, and we're just mindlessly eating with no thought as to how we feel, how fast we're doing it, whether or not we're chewing, or any of those things. So I think that was a great insight. As I talked more and more with some of my friends that are nutrition experts that help people become more mindful eaters, they kind of alluded to this tool that I'm starting to see more of, called a hunger and fullness tracker. And so can you just walk us through a little bit more about like what hunger and fullness actually are, and what a hunger fullness tracker is, and how it may help someone become a more mindful eater?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hunger we can experience hunger in a number of different ways, right? I would say the most kind of like prototypical feeling of hunger is going to, occur a certain time after you've last eat, when you're feeling kind of that biological drive to eat. So, maybe your stomach is growling, but it's even probably a little bit before that, where you're starting to get that inkling of like, okay, I'm ready for my next meal. If we kind of prolong the length of time before we eat, then you may get into what we call more primal hunger. And that's when you're almost, some people may call that hanger, right? You start seeing red, you don't care, maybe you're not very kind to the people around you.
Right.
You don't really care what you eat. You're just trying to get food into your mouth as quickly as possible. And that's typically, attributed to like a drop in blood sugar. And again, your body is pushing you to get food. It is very challenging to make nourishing decisions for yourself when you're at that point of primal hunger. So we really like to encourage our members to eat when they're in that state of biological hunger. But I will also say that, food is not just fuel, right? We eat for a lot of different reasons. Most often you want to be eating in response to like your true physical or biological hunger, but there's also, kind of emotional hunger as well. Some of you may have experienced that over, especially the last year, being as stressful as it is. And so just recognizing that like food is emotional, I think is helpful to kind of normalize that experience and just to understand that exists on a spectrum, right? A healthy relationship with food includes emotions, but if food is like your only emotional outlet, then we probably need to pull it back a little bit. So anyway, a little bit on my soapbox there. That's the hunger piece. And then your fullness is when you are, satisfied and satiated. And that comes from a number of factors as well. And is strongly correlated with blood sugar. So, feeling full is about having enough food. So enough in terms of, the caloric amount of food, and then also the composition of those calories. So your carbohydrates, your proteins, your fats. If you have a meal that's a really beautiful balance of like, let's say rice and chicken and avocado and lots of veggies, that's going to fill you up in a different way than just like a big bag of popcorn because of the macronutrient composition. But I would also add that another kind of factor in fullness is going to be the volume of food as well. Our stomach has these stretch receptors. And so, as your stomach begins to stretch a little bit, your body starts communicating with your brain to send you those fullness signals. So that's a little bit of kind of, hunger and fullness. And the question around using a tracker to help you get started, I think makes a ton of sense. We know that diets, if you imagine like your kind of mind-body connection, right? Diets really affect that connection on two levels. One is physiologically, right? We actually know that, the longer someone diets or the more extreme someone diets, they can like physiologically struggle to feel hunger and to feel fullness. Like it just may not really register. There's also a psychological component that I see quite a bit, where because of diets, women don't trust their hunger and fullness cues. Yeah. They say things like, well, how could I possibly be hungry? It's only 11 a.m. and I just ate breakfast at 9 a.m., right? We have all of these rules and all of these ideas of what, when we should be hungry and what should make us full. And I'm looking at another person's plate and, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's all she's eating. Well, I guess I should put my fork down even though I'm still hungry. Like there's just a lot going on with hunger and fullness. And I think that's where having a tracker, especially as you're getting started and hopefully working to kind of build that body trust, can be really helpful as, a tool and as a way of, staying accountable, but also being curious about what's happening in your body.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that detailed explanation. I think, I personally feel a lot more confident in my knowledge of mindful eating and hunger and fullness. I'm definitely going to take the time to apply that now. And I hope our audience has gotten the same benefit out of that. As we kind of wrap up, I know many of our audience are always looking for programs that will help them achieve their goals that aren't necessarily that super diet restrictive, heavy focus that we talked about. So can you just talk a little bit about, the Flourish program and what you do and how you help women?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking. So Flourish is a coaching program and community made for women who want to prioritize a sustainable approach for both their mental and physical health. So, we've talked a lot about dieting here today, and, I would imagine many of the listeners here will have had experience dieting, but I also know how kind of frustrating and overwhelming it can feel to be told, well, just don't diet. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because if I'm just not dieting, I'm going to eat donuts and pizza all day, or what have you. So there are these really sound principles of nutrition and other kind of pillars of health, as we call them, to bring into focus and really think about creating those stepwise sustainable changes over time. So we help women develop healthy habits that stick through a subscription membership that includes coaching, group coaching, and private coaching with nutrition and mindset coaches. We also have a community element that is really powerful. And then we have our curriculum, which offers that clarity amidst, a very noisy wellness world.
Awesome. That sounds like an amazing program. And hopefully, a few of our audience members are interested interested in getting connected to it. I know you have kind of a challenge coming up, and all of our audience members, they're interested in getting connected with you. Can you just walk us through that upcoming challenge? And then for our audience members that want to learn more about you, more about Flourish, get connected with you, where can they go to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are running our Flourishing Life Challenge in the month of May. It's going to be super fun. We've basically built out, 4 weeks of habits to implement, and we'll be coaching and guiding you through both in group coaching throughout the month of May and also private coaching. So every challenge member will get access to our nutrition and mindset coaches throughout the month of May, which we're super excited to offer. So if you're interested in being part of the challenge, you actually have to be on our wait list. This is for waitlist members only. So go to weflourish.com. You'll see in the top right corner a button to add your name to the wait list, and you'll get all the information there. And if you also want to follow us on Instagram, we are at WeFlourish app on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks for all that information. And thanks again for, sharing your wisdom about mindful eating and helping us really try and navigate our way through, enhancing our health without feeling that like guilt driven, diet focused sort of mentality.